The pounding on the mill door came just past midnight, hard enough to shake flour loose from the rafters. Bram opened it, with a lamp in one hand and his splitting hammer in the other. On the step stood a woman he had never seen. Skin the olive green of new willow leaves, ears drawn to a point, a small boy asleep on her hip, and 2 older children pressed to her legs. Rain sheeted off all 4 of them, far down the valley road, past the black willows. Torches moved, dogs called through the wet. "One night," the woman said. Her voice was low and level, the voice of someone who had already spent every scrap of her fear. "Hide them one night, that's all I'm asking." Bram had lived alone. 6 years. He knew what the torches meant, and he knew how much trouble stood on his step, and he stepped back. "Anyway, get inside, quick." She didn't come in. She pushed the children through the door instead, the 2 who could walk, then bent and set the sleeping one into the oldest boy's arms. From inside her soaked coat she drew a small thing, carved from bone, a whistle no longer than her thumb, 2 holes bored in the top. She pressed it into Bram's hand and closed his fingers over it. "2 notes," she said, "1 up, 1 down. They know it. Blow it, and they come. To you. Anything else they hear in the dark, they hide and they stay hid." She looked past him at the 3 of them dripping on his floor. "Torro minds the little ones. Nima, you listen to Torro. Beck sleeps. Where are you going?" Bram asked. She was already backing into the rain. "To give the dogs something better to chase." Then, quieter, only for him. "If a man asks, you saw nothing green tonight, for your own neck." "One night," he said. "Then what?" But she had turned, and she was running, not away from the torches, toward them, up the open road where the lamps would catch her, waving her arms once she cleared the mill so the whole valley could see which way she'd gone. The dogs swung after her. The torches followed. Bram stood in his own doorway with a stranger's whistle in his fist and 3 of her children behind him, and watching her pull the hunt off her own blood, he understood she did not expect to be back. By morning, he shut the door. By dawn, the rain had stopped, the road lay empty, and she had not come. The oldest boy hadn't slept. Bram found him against the grain sacks with the little one across his knees, and the girl curled beside him, all 3 awake, all 3 watching the door as though staring hard enough might turn it into their mother. "She's coming back," the boy said. Not a question, not quite a lie. 11, maybe. Sharp-faced, sharp-eyed, a boy who'd learned to sound certain because the little ones needed him to. "Sure," Bram said. "Eat first." He had bread gone hard and a crock of dripping and half a wheel of cheese, and he watched them fall on it, the way children fall on food when they've walked a long way on nothing. The girl ate with one hand and kept the other flat on her small brother's back. The little one was 5 if he was a day, green as a bean, and cried without sound when he woke, which was worse than the loud kind. "Bram," Bram told them, since they hadn't asked. "I grind grain. You stay off the yard and away from the windows till your mother's back. Can you do that?" "We're good at hiding," the girl said. She said it, the way another child might say, "We're good at cards," and something in Bram's chest went tight and stayed that way a long while. "I'm Nima, that's Torro, that's Beck, Mama's Vessa." "Vessa," Bram repeated, so he'd have it, he'd run the valley. Mill 20 years since his father, and he was known for one soft thing in a hard trade he forgave. A poor harvest, a sick cow, a bad winter. He ground the grain and let the debt ride year after year till half. The valley owed him coin. They'd stopped expecting to be asked for. His wife had called it foolish back when he'd had a wife. He'd called it insurance and never known against what. That first day taught him the shape of the thing. The mill had a loft above the stones, reached by a ladder he could pull up, at a root cellar under the floor, with a trapdoor a rug could cover. He walked the children through both until even Beck could find the cellar in the dark. He nailed sacking over the loft window. He learned that Torro would not eat until the others had, that Nima heard a cart on the road before he did, and that Beck left small green handprints anywhere flour touched. The rail, the sacks, the door, bright as gilt. The first time Bram found a row of them along the meal bin, his heart went sideways. He scrubbed them off with a wet rag, fast, breathing hard as if the reeve stood already in the yard. He scrubbed every print he found for a month. The reeve came on the 4th day. Bram had the children in the cellar before Daniel's horse reached the gate. Daniel was a decent man doing an indecent job, which made him more dangerous than a cruel one. He sat his horse and looked at the mill the way he looked at everything, like he was already. Writing it down. Quiet up here, Daniel said. Always is. Notice came through the valley. He didn't hand it down, just held it against his knee. Bonded folk run off from Grull's quarry over the ridge, a woman and 3 young, orc stock. There's a reward on the young ones, more than on her, if you can credit it. Whole thing stamped legal. Grull's got the paper. Reward, Bram said. For children. For property, the paper says. Daniel's mouth twisted at the word. He didn't own it. He only carried it. A dead man's debt run down to his kin. It's ugly and it's law, and I'm the one. Has to say so out loud. He looked at the mill again. The nailed sacking, the 2 clean rail. You tell me, Bram, if you saw them. I'd tell you, Bram said, and heard how easily the lie came, and hated that it came easy. Daniel held his eye a moment too long. Then he tucked the notice away. Grull's man's called Cade, thin fellow, always smiling. He'll come round asking, and he doesn't forgive. He turned the horse. I don't like the paper either. Doesn't change what it makes me. He rode off. Bram stood in the yard until his hands stopped shaking, then went down and lifted the trapdoor. 3 faces looked up at him out of the dark, and Beck had his handprints all over the cellar wall. One night became a week. A week became the turning of the season. Bram stopped scrubbing every print. He told himself it was practical. A man can't spend his life on his knees with a rag. But the truth was, he'd found one small. Green hand on the doorframe at the height of his hip, and hadn't been able to take it off. It was where? Beck reached to steady himself coming through. Bram left it. Then he left the ones on the meal bin. The prints crept up the mill, a hand at a time, a record of children growing where no children were supposed to be, and he learned to see them as his own secret instead of his ruin. Keeping them cost him. He turned custom away rather than let carts into the yard, and word went round that the miller had gone strange and slow. He spent coin, he'd meant, for a new millstone on shoes, because 3 children wear through shoes, and on cloth, because they grow out of everything, and on more flour than one man eats, which is a thing a baker notices. The baker was Ilsa, and Ilsa noticed. You, buying for an orphanage now? She asked, weighing out his 4th heavy sack of the month. She was broad and shrewd and missed nothing over a counter. Rats, Bram said. Terrible year for rats. Rats. Ilsa tied the sack. She didn't smile. Yep, my father's a bed and can't keep food down, and half what I know about easing a sick belly I learned off an old orc. Midwife on the coast road years back. Gentlefolk, whatever the notices say. She pushed the sack across. Feed your rats, Bram. He carried it home not knowing if he'd been warned or offered a hand, and it turned out to be both. The children changed the mill without meaning to. Torro learned the stones, where to feed the grain, how to read the hopper, by the sound, when to slack the sluice. Within a season he could run a grind alone, and did, in the gray. Hour before anyone came, so Bram woke to flour already dressed. Nima had a way with anything hurting. When the mill horse foundered and Bram had given it up, she sat in the straw 2 nights running with her hand on its side, and the horse stood on the 3rd day. And Beck? Beck was 5 and then 6, and followed Bram like a shadow, with feet, and left his handprints everywhere, and once, gravely, took Bram's big hand and pressed it flat and spilled flour on the beam beside his own small one. Now there's 2, he said, pleased, as if he'd fixed something. Bram left both prints on the beam. He caught himself checking they were still there, mornings. Daniel came back twice that year, both times unannounced. The way a man tests a floorboard he doesn't trust. The second time he was quicker than the children, in the doorway. Before Torro got back down the ladder, and for one long breath, a small green face watched the reeve from the loft. Edge, and the reeve watched back. Bram stepped into the line of it with a full sack on his shoulder and set it down slow between them and said the horse wanted shoeing and would Daniil ride and send the smith up, since Miller couldn't leave his stones. It was nothing, an errand, a thing to turn a man's head. Daniel turned his head. Then he looked at the empty loft edge a moment more, and he took the errand and rode. He never said what he had or hadn't seen, but he came slower after that, and always sent word ahead, which was a kindness dressed as procedure. And Bram understood that the reeve had chosen not to know, and that a man who chooses not to know can choose again. Cade came in the autumn. He was thin and he was smiling, exactly as Daniel had said, and he leaned in the mill door where the light was, and looked at everything without seeming to. "Miller," Cade said, "you do a lot of grinding for a man alone. Valley's got a lot of grain." Cade's eyes went up the wall, past the meal. "Ben, along the beam." Bram had moved the ladder that morning on a feeling he couldn't name. The loft window was dark and blind. "I'm looking for strays. A woman and 3 green pups. Worth good coin, the pups especially. A bond runs. Longer on the young, see? More years of them left to work. Man could set himself up nicely." He smiled wider. You in green. Miller?" "No," Bram said. Cade's gaze found the door frame, the hip-high handprint. He looked at it a long moment. Bram's heart stopped. "Flowers a filthy business," Cade said at last, and pushed off the frame. "Gets everywhere, on everything." He touched 2 fingers to his brow, mockingly. "I'll be about. I'm patient. Grull pays me to be patient." And he was gone up the road, whistling, and Bram was on his knees scrubbing that print off the frame before the dust of the horse had settled, hating every stroke of the rag. That was the night he decided he had to know what he was hiding them from. He knew where Grull worked his bond, the gray quarry over the ridge, a day's walk, a place people mentioned they mentioned a bad tooth. He told Torro he was buying millstone flint. He went to see if the children's mother was still alive. She was. He found the quarry from above at dusk, a raw gray wound in the hill, and a stockade below it where the bond had slept behind a fence of split logs. He'd meant only to look. Then he saw her, carrying water across the yard, thinner than the night she'd stood on his step, but unmistakable olive green in the last light. Before he decided to, he was down at the fence with his fingers through the gap, saying her name low. Vessa, Vessa. She came like a ghost, quick and quiet, and when she saw who it was, every bit of color left her face. "No," she said, "no, you shouldn't be here. If they follow you back." She stopped. Her eyes searched his. "Are they alive?" "Alive. Fed. Torro runs my stones better than I do. Nima fixed my horse." Bex put a hand on every bored eye. "Own." He watched her break and hold at the same time, the way only a mother can. "It's been a year, near. You said one night." "I know what I said." Her voice cracked once, then steadied. "I gave myself up that night, on the road, so the Dons would have the mother and stop hunting the young. Grull took me, and I thought that was the price, my back for their freedom. I was wrong." "Wrong how?" She gripped the fence. "The debt isn't mine to pay off with my labor. It's my husband's. Drake's. He borrowed heavy from Grull to buy us all out. Of a worse bond, a real ending, a chance at free. Then the North Face came down on him before he paid. A copper of it. When a bonded man dies owing, the debt falls on his blood, all his blood." She looked at him and made him understand. "The paper names the children by name, because they've the most years of work left in them. My surrender bought them a start down the road, nothing more. I never meant one night, Miller. I meant get them. Gone, and if the road takes me, raise them, and don't let anyone tell them their years belong to a man with a fence." Everything Bram thought he'd been doing turned over in the dark and became something else. He hadn't been keeping 3 children safe for a night while their mother ran an errand. He'd been handed a family by a woman walking into a trap that couldn't even spring the way she'd hoped. A woman who'd spent herself for a head start and been left alive. To know it hadn't been enough. "Then I'll pay it," he said. She almost laughed. "It's a fortune, Bram. It's more than your mill. And even if you had it, you'd have to lay it down in front of a reeve, in the open. And the moment Grull knows where the children are, he takes them and works out the redemption after, if he ever does. Coming here, you've made a line straight from that fence to your door." She pressed her hand flat to the logs. "Stop coming, please. That's the whole of what I'm begging now. Stop, so they stay lost." He put his hand against hers. "Wood between 2 notes," he said, because he didn't know how else to promise. "1 up, 1 down. If ever you get past this fence, that's the sound of home." He walked back over the ridge in the dark, and he did not know that Cade had watched a gray-faced stranger leave the stockade fence and had asked a question and had gotten a name. He came home and counted what he had, which took no time, and then counted what a redemption would need, which took no counting at all. The 2 numbers weren't in the same country. He called in 3 of his oldest debts, gently, from people who could spare them, and hated the sound of his own voice asking, and dropped the coin in a crock, and buried the crock, and watched it fill a finger's width in a season. Hopeless arithmetic. He did it every night anyway, because the only thing worse than a sum you can't meet is not knowing the sum at all. What he understood, burying that crock, was that one man's savings would never buy this back. He didn't yet know what would, and over the ridge, Cade had a name and a direction and all the patience Grull paid for. He didn't ride to the mill. He rode the roads around it, the smith, the market, the coast lane, asking who bought children's shoes for children no one ever saw, who ground more flour than one man swallows, and he wrote the answers behind his smile and waited for a reason worth carrying to Grull. Winter was the flood. The thaw came fast and wrong, all at once, and the mill race that turned. Bram's wheel swelled brown and ugly and jumped its bank in the night. He woke to Nima shaking him. She'd heard it, of course, she'd heard it. And by lamplight, the yard was already ankle-deep and rising, and the low cottages down. The lane where the poorest of the valley lived were filling floor by floor. There was no time to weigh the secret against anything. Bram put the bone whistle to his lips and blew it hard, 1 up, 1 down, and the children came to him out of the dark, exactly as their mother had trained them, and then all 4 of them were out in the flood, doing the only thing there was to do, waking the lane, carrying the old and the small up the rise to the mill, which stood highest. Torro went into the Cole family's cottage, where old Cole, the wheelwright, couldn't climb the water on his ruined knees, and carried him out on his back, an 11-year-old orc with a grown man across his shoulders, in front of the whole waking valley. Nima worked the cold and the frightened small hands, sure, a green child pressing warmth back into human ones. Beck held a lantern high on the mill step so people could find the light. By gray morning, the water dropped, and the lane stood soaked and standing, and no one had drowned, and the whole valley had seen exactly what had come out of the miller's mill. The secret was over. Bram stood in his ruined yard and waited for it to cost him. It didn't, not the way he'd feared. Ilsa arrived with bread and looked at the exhausted children, and said only, "Rats," flat, and set the bread down. Old Cole, dried out and shaking, took Torro's face in both hands and said he'd not forget who'd carried him, boy nor color nor bond. The valley, which owed Bram 100 small forgiven debts, and now owed his 3 hidden children, their grandfathers and children, closed around the mill quietly. The way a family closes a door against the weather. No one rode for the reward, but someone else had already ridden. Cade had traced the gray-faced stranger's ridge path back to a valley mill, and Grull came himself on a good horse with 4 Men and the paper and Reeve Daniil summoned along to make it lawful, and, behind them, roped at the wrist, and, stumbling to keep up, he brought Vessa. To sign the seizure, he said, to name her own young, or to watch. Bram never learned which. The valley was still hanging its bedding to dry when they came up the lane, and so the valley was still all out of doors when it happened, which was the one thing that saved them. Grull was a heavy man with a soft voice, which is the worst kind. He read from the paper in the yard, loud enough for all of it, a dead man's debt, a bonded line, 3 young to be taken up, and work to term, the law's own hand on his. The Reeve will witness, he said, that I take what's owed. You'll witness nothing yet, Daniil said, and his voice was tired and hard. The law that lets you claim lets him redeem. Say the sum, Grull, in front of these people. A debt can be paid down or taken up before a Reeve, and if it's met, your bond's void. That's the same law you're leaning on. Then say it fast, Miller. Grull's soft eyes moved over the crowd, over the children Bram had put behind him. It's more coin than your mill and your stones in your soul. Say it fast. Before I remember, I could just take them and argue the price later. Bram had the coin he had. It was years of savings, and it was nowhere near. He laid the purse on the ground in the wet in front of everyone, and it was so plainly not enough that Grull smiled. And then Ilsa stepped up beside him and set down a smaller purse. For a filthy business, she said. Rats. Old Cole's son laid down what a wheelwright's family could spare, and said the name of the boy who'd carried his father through the water. A woman whose grinding debt Bram had let ride for 6 winters emptied her apron of coin she'd been saving against. Her own bad year, and another did the same, and another, the whole valley coming forward one at a time into the mud, each of them naming a thing, a debt forgiven, a horse healed, an old man carried, a child warmed, laying it down until the pile in front of the miller stopped being a joke. But a pile that isn't a joke is not the same as a pile that's enough. Dano crouched and counted it with his own hands, aloud, coin by coin, so no one could say after that it hadn't been done in the open. The count climbed, and Grull's smile thinned as it climbed, and then the coins ran out with the sum not yet met, and the yard went quiet, and Grull's smile came back. Short, he said, soft. Close is a debtor's word. He tipped his head at 2 of his men, and they moved, not fast, just certain, the way men move when they think. The law is behind them, stepping wide around the crowd toward the children at Bram's back. It was Ilsa who broke. It. She'd given once already. Now she worked her mother's ring off her finger and dropped it ringing onto the coins. Weigh it, she told Daniel flat. Old Cole dragged a silver buckle off his belt. A farmer set down the money for next year's seed and said he'd plant late and pray. The line formed a second time, second gifts laid on. First, and Grull's 2 men slowed halfway across the yard, because a crowd that keeps giving is a different animal than a crowd that's spent, and every soul there could feel it turning. Daniil weighed the ring and the buckle with the rest and counted on, and the sum climbed the last hard stretch and went past. He stood, and he was the Reeve again, all the way through. It's met, Daniil said. The debt's redeemed. The bond's void. The woman and the 3 both. It's one debt, and it's paid. You've no claim here now, Grull. None. That was the moment Grull should have taken his coin and gone. Instead, he did the thing that finished him. He lunged past Bram and caught Little Beck by the arm and hauled the child off his feet, snarling that the count was short, that he'd take the smallest and settle later, that no Reeve could stop a man collecting his own. And Beck screamed, and the sound went through the whole soaked crowd like a struck bell. Bram had the whistle at his mouth before he knew it. 2 notes, one up, one down, high and clear over the yard. But the children didn't hide. They came, every one of them, and every one of the valley with them. Torro hit Grull low and Nima high, and Vessa tore her roped hands free of the man holding her and reached her son and the crowd that had just bought these. Children's freedom with their own bad-year coins surged forward as one animal, and old Cole was shouting, "He takes a child!" In front of the reeve he takes a child, and Daniil was already there with his hand locked on Grull's collar. It was over in a breath. Beck was on the ground in his mother's arms, howling whole. Grull was down in the mud with his own men stepping back from him, because there is nothing on any paper that lets a bondsman seize a redeemed child by the arm in front of a reeve and 40 witnesses, and every one of them had watched him try. Daniel hauled him up by the collar. "You laid hands on a free child before the law and the valley both," the reeve said, and now his voice had everything in it he'd been swallowing for a year. "The paper's dead, and I've got new work for you, Grull, and a cart to carry you to it." He looked once at Bram over the man's head, one plain look, and it said, "I never liked the paper either," and it was as close to a thank you as a reeve could come and still be a reeve. They took Grull down the lane. In his own men's silence, the paper Daniil kept, to burn or to file, it didn't matter which, no single sheet had done any of it. Coins had, neighbors had, a whistle had, and an old man's memory of who carried him. Vessa knelt in the mud with all 3 of her children in her arms at last, a year late, and she was shaking, and she looked up at Bram over their heads with an expression he had no word for and didn't. "Need one. One night," she said. "You were bad at counting," he said, and she laughed, wet and broken and free, and it was the best sound the mill had heard in 20 years. Spring came green up the valley, and the mill ran clean. Vessa didn't leave. There was nowhere she'd rather be than the place her children had grown safe, and she was worth 3 hired hands, and after a while, nobody in the valley remembered a time the mill hadn't had a family in it. Torro dressed the stones, Nima had half the sick animals in 3 farms brought to her door, and old Cole made her a proper stool to sit on while she worked her patient magic, which wasn't magic at all, only care. Beck turned 7 and stopped crying in his sleep. There's a beam over the millstones where the light comes in. It's covered now, in handprints set in white paint, a whole family of them, small to large, green and human both. The way Beck started it years back with 2 prints in spilled flour and the words, "Now theirs." 2. They add 1 every spring, everyone pressing a hand to the beam on the same morning, and the row gets longer, and the old prints stay. Bram checks they're still there, mornings, out of habit that turned into something he won't call by its name. And the whistle hangs on a nail by the door, the little bone one with 2 holes, the one that used to mean hide and stay hid. Now Vessa takes it down at dusk and blows it across the yard. 1 up, 1 down, and 3 children who aren't so small anymore come in from the fields to supper, running, the way they used to run only from the dark, running now toward the light on the mill. Step where the miller's standing in the door, having long ago stopped counting nights. So tell me, which moment hit you hardest? The mother running toward the torches so the dogs would chase her instead of her children? The old man's face in Torro's hands after the flood? Or the whole soaked valley stepping into the mud, 1 coin at a time, to buy back a family that was never theirs by blood, but had become theirs anyway? Let me know down in the comments. If this story moved you, give it a like so more people find it, and subscribe for the next tale in the Orkbon saga. There's more of this world waiting, and I'd love to have you here for it.